She built one of the most decorated careers in Hollywood history. 2 Oscars, 3 Emmys, a Tony, and 5 decades of unforgettable performances, stretching from a giant ape's leading lady to Broadway's most punishing tragedies. And then, at the peak of a role that made her a horror icon to an entirely new generation, she simply walked away. For years, fans of American Horror Story have wondered what actually pushed Jessica Lange out the door after 4 unforgettable seasons. Now, in her own words, across a string of interviews most people never connected together, the real answer has finally come into focus, and it has almost nothing to do with the show itself. To understand why she left, you first have to understand everything she'd already survived to get there. Jessica Phyllis Lange was born on April 20th, 1949, in Cloquet, Minnesota, the daughter of a traveling salesman whose work kept the family moving through a string of small towns growing up. She studied art at the University of Minnesota, where she met her first husband, photographer Paco Grande, and the two eventually left together for Paris, where Lange studied mime under Etienne Decroux before drifting into modeling work back in New York. She was, by her own later admission, an unlikely candidate for movie stardom at the time, with no formal acting training and no connections whatsoever to the industry she was about to walk into. In 1976, producer Dino De Laurentiis was searching for an unknown face to star in his big-budget remake of King Kong, and Lange, broke and mostly unnoticed, walked into the audition with nothing to lose. Foolhardily, I believed I could do anything, she told Vanity Fair years later, describing herself walking into that cattle call at 114 pounds, looking nothing like the tall, buxom blondes the casting directors were used to seeing. By the time it was her turn, the director had already left for the day, and she ended up doing her screen test for the assistant director instead, who was impressed enough to call the director back down personally. She got the part, but the film that made her instantly famous also nearly broke her. Before filming began, De Laurentiis wasn't even convinced she was attractive enough for the role, and Lange had to gain weight, lighten her hair, and have her braces removed just to be considered camera-ready. King Kong was a 9-month shoot, spent acting almost entirely opposite a blank wall or a mechanical ape, with no formal training and no idea whether any of it was working, relying heavily on the mime techniques she'd studied years earlier in Paris just to give herself something to hold on to in scenes with no real scene partner at all. We shot for 9 months, and we'd have a lot of downtime, she recalled decades later, describing the strange, isolating rhythm of a blockbuster production built around special effects rather than performance. De Laurentiis, hungry for a marketing angle, publicly compared her to the next Marilyn Monroe, a label Lange has said upset her deeply even decades later. "That really upsets me," she said at the time. She was a tragic figure who led a tragic life and who wasn't taken as the serious artist she was. I don't want to compete with her memory or with anyone. The film was a box office hit, but critics tore into her performance specifically, dismissing her as a former model who'd gotten lucky. And despite a 7-year contract with De Laurentiis, Lange didn't work again for 3 years. She spent that stretch back in New York, studying seriously with acting teachers Sandra Seacat and Mira Rostova, determined to actually learn the craft she'd stumbled into, rather than simply trade on the attention King Kong had given her. The real turning point came in 1982, and it came twice in the same year. Director Graham Clifford cast her as doomed actress Frances Farmer in Frances, a punishing, deeply committed performance that had her watching hours of Farmer's old home movies and footage, including summer stock films from before Farmer was even famous, and losing weight and sleep until she was teetering, by her own account, on the edge of a breakdown by the time filming wrapped. It remains, to many critics, the single best performance of her career. The same year, almost as a form of recovery, she took the completely opposite kind of role, playing a vain, demanding soap opera diva in the comedy Tootsie, a part she said she needed specifically to clear her head after the exhausting intensity of Frances. The Academy nominated her for both performances that year, Best Actress for Frances and Best Supporting Actress for Tootsie, a feat only one other actress in Oscar history, Teresa Wright, back in 1942, had ever managed. She won Best Supporting Actress for Tootsie that night, still to date the highest-grossing film of her entire career. Best Actress went to a rising star named Meryl Streep for her performance in Sophie's Choice, and the two blonde actresses, born only 2 months apart, would spend the rest of the decade being quietly measured against each other by an industry that loved a good rivalry narrative more than either woman ever seemed to. According to friends close to her at the time, the moment Lange collected her own award early in the ceremony, she reportedly turned to someone nearby and said, "That's the moment I knew Meryl had won Best Actress." A quiet, knowing acknowledgement of exactly how the night was going to end. Lange has since made peace with the comparison in her own dry way. Decades later, asked about a line in Feud where her character, Joan Crawford, claimed to sleep with her Oscars, Lange laughed and set the record straight for herself. "Well, I don't," she said, adding simply that they're not used as doorstops either. It was on the set of Frances, in fact, that Lange's own life quietly detonated in ways that took her years to speak about publicly. She was still involved with Russian ballet dancer Mikhail Baryshnikov, whom she'd met after the long, quiet stretch following King Kong. But an on-set connection with her co-star, playwright and actor Sam Shepard, snowballed into something neither of them expected. "Sam and I were so much in love, so wild about each other and being together," she told Vanity Fair in 1991. "We were absolutely inseparable. We couldn't even go to the grocery store without each other." Shepard, for his part, was married at the time to actress Olan Jones, and the affair unfolded amid its own tangle of complications. Lange caring for a newborn daughter with Baryshnikov, while falling for a man she's described as endlessly mysterious, someone who was always disappearing into his own world of music and nightlife. Leaving Baryshnikov for Shepard cost her a 2-year silence between them once she told him she was living with someone else, a rupture she's called the ultimate betrayal from his side and one of the most painful periods of her life. "I would never want to go through that again," she said. But her bond with Shepard endured for the next 27 years, producing 2 children, Hannah and Samuel, and one of Hollywood's most private, most enduring partnerships, one the 2 of them mostly kept out of the press entirely. "He's a great man, a natural man, which is rare," she said of him in that same 1991 interview. "I've had romances with what you'd call famous men, and none compare to Sam in terms of maleness. Shepard, in later interviews of his own, described their relationship as tumultuous but unshakable, telling The Guardian in 2010 that despite the fireworks between them, she was the only woman he could live with. She's also spoken since about how much motherhood itself reordered her entire sense of self, describing a shift that no amount of professional success had ever given her. "It opened my heart and made me a different person," she told AARP magazine years later. "Every move you make is with someone else in mind. I loved being a mother more than anything else in the world, and being a grandmother is even more fun." Lange kept building one of the most respected bodies of work of her generation through the 80s and 90s, earning Oscar nominations for Country, Sweet Dreams, and Music Box, roles that consistently cast her as women pushed to their breaking point by circumstance, before finally winning her second Academy Award, this time for Best Actress, playing a fragile, unraveling military wife in 1994's Blue Sky, a performance shelved for 2 years by a studio bankruptcy before it ever reached theaters. She added a Tony Award decades later in 2016 for her searing performance as Mary Tyrone in a Broadway revival of Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night, completing what's known in the industry as the Triple Crown of Acting, an Oscar, an Emmy, and a Tony, an honor only a small handful of performers in history have ever achieved across film, television, and stage alike.
That Emmy came from an unlikely place one Lange herself admits she never expected to find herself in. In 2011, director Ryan Murphy asked her to join a new, strange horror anthology series called American Horror Story, and Lange has said she only agreed to a single season at first. "When I originally agreed to do this, it was for 1 season, she told Deadline. "I thought this will be interesting to try. I've never done this kind of television before." As Constance Langdon, the venomous, secretive neighbor at the center of Murder House Lange, found something in the character that reminded her of the extreme, uncompromising roles she'd chased in her younger years, and audiences responded instantly, both to the character and to a string of major award nominations that followed almost immediately. That response changed everything about her arrangement with the show. Murphy kept writing her back in year after year, and unusually for television, he began building entire seasons around conversations with Lange herself before a single script page was written, treating her less like a hired lead and more like a genuine creative partner. Sister Jude Martin, the punishing, secretly haunted nun running asylum, came next, followed by supreme witch Fiona Good in Coven, and finally circus ringleader Elsa Mars in Freak Show, a role reportedly built specifically around a passion Lange had mentioned to Murphy directly, her own fascination with traveling sideshows and the decadent, doomed glamour of Weimar-era German culture. In Freak Show, she even sang the songs herself, rather than lip-syncing, delivering haunting, full-throated, live renditions of David Bowie's Life on Mars. And in a later season, Lana Del Rey's Gods and Monsters performances that became instant fan favorites, and some of the most replayed clips of the entire franchise, clips that still circulate widely years later. Across those 4 lead seasons, she picked up 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe, and a Screen Actors Guild Award, cementing herself as the anthology's beating heart, and arguably the single biggest reason the format worked as well as it did in those early years. Then, after Freak Show wrapped, she stepped back to a supporting, occasional presence, and she's been remarkably consistent and honest about exactly why ever since. It ends up being a lot of time during the year, being committed to something she told Entertainment Weekly in 2013. "I haven't done that for a long time. It's like doing a stage play between the rehearsal and the run. This is a 6-month commitment every year. That will be 4 years in a row. I want to have more time to myself, I guess." She wasn't leaving over any conflict with Murphy or the show itself, and she was careful to say so directly. In a later interview with Bustle, she made that plain. "I feel like I got the best of it in those first 4 seasons," she said. "Great characters. It was exciting to do." She simply felt the story she personally had to tell inside that show had reached its natural end at 4 remarkable characters, and at her age, with an already overflowing career behind her, she wasn't willing to keep signing away half of every year indefinitely, no matter how good the material kept being. She's since reflected on the sheer density of those scripts too, telling Vulture in 2024 that when the writers would ask her directly what she wanted to do with a scene, she'd often push for a monologue, adding that those characters were overwritten and fun to play, and that the great thing about the show's whole premise was that every season told a completely different story. Murphy didn't let her go entirely. For 2018's Apocalypse, Lange has described being talked back for a brief return purely through his persistence and his instinct for exactly which scenes would tempt her. "It was like all conversations with Ryan," she explained to the Rap's Emmy magazine. "He's talking about the relationship with the children, and a 10-page monologue, the drunkenness and the death. He hits all the scenes that would make it interesting for me to come back to play this character." She returned for 2 episodes as Constance Langdon, gave fans the closure they'd been asking for, and then stepped away again for good. The two have continued working together since, most notably on 2017's Feud, Bet and Joan, where Lange played Joan Crawford opposite Susan Sarandon's Bette Davis. Proof that her decision to leave AHS was never really about Murphy at all. In the years since, Lange has grown increasingly candid about why she's pulled back from acting more broadly, and her reasoning cuts right to the heart of what's changed in the industry since her King Kong days, when a single actress's face could carry an entire marketing campaign, whether the studio actually respected her work or not. Speaking to The Hollywood Reporter, she didn't mince words about modern blockbuster filmmaking. "The emphasis becomes not on the art or the artist or the storytelling," she said. "It becomes about satisfying your stockholders." She pointed specifically at the comic book franchise model dominating theaters now, saying plainly that Hollywood has sacrificed this art that we've been involved in for the sake of profit, and criticized the frantic editing style of modern films that rarely lets a camera simply hold on an actor's face, the way films did when she was coming up, back when a single unbroken take of a woman's expression could carry more weight than an entire action sequence. "I don't know if it's because the filmmakers think that they can't hold the attention of the audience anymore," she reflected, adding simply, "That kind of filmmaking drives me crazy." By 2023, speaking with The Telegraph, she'd become even more direct about where she saw her own career heading, framing it less as an ending than as one final, deliberate choice among many she's made throughout her life. "I don't think I'll do this too much longer," she said, though she's continued taking select film and stage projects since unwilling to fully close the door even as she keeps one hand resting on the handle. Looking back across the entire arc of it, the terrified girl doing her screen test to a director who'd already walked out of the room, the punishing 9 months trapped acting opposite a mechanical ape, the affair that reshaped her entire adult life, the Oscar night she watched Meryl Streep take the prize she might have deserved just as much, and finally, the horror icon who sang Bowie under a circus tent in her 60s. The through line becomes obvious. Jessica Lange never left American Horror Story because the work stopped being good or because anything went wrong behind the scenes with Ryan Murphy, a collaborator she's continued working with for over a decade. She left because she'd already spent an entire career learning exactly how much of herself any single project was allowed to take before she needed to take some of it back for herself. She said as much plainly, without any bitterness, about wanting more time for herself after 4 years of 6-month commitments, and she's been just as plain more recently about why she's pulled back from acting altogether, criticizing an industry she feels has traded storytelling for stockholder returns and frantic editing for the kind of patient-held shots that once let an actor's face carry an entire scene. 4 seasons, 4 unforgettable characters, and the clear-eyed honesty to know precisely when enough truly was enough, delivered without a hint of the drama that usually accompanies a beloved star's exit from a hit show. That's not retreat. That's the same instinct that got a broke, unknown 114-pound girl a shot at King Kong in the first place. A woman who has always known exactly what she had to offer and who has never once been willing to give away a single ounce more of it than she personally chose to. If this look behind the legend of Jessica Lange moved you, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more layers to her story than a single television exit could ever capture, and we'll keep pulling back the curtain on the real stories behind the icons you grew up watching, because the truths behind their legacies deserve to be remembered long after the credits roll.